Savannah Guthrie made a statement in her Today Show interview that should have generated days of serious follow-up coverage, but somehow passed with almost no sustained examination. She was asked about the ransom notes, about whether she believed them, and she said, "There are a lot of different notes, I think, that came, and I think most of them, it's my understanding, are not real. But I believe the 2 notes that we received, that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real." Stop right there. She did not say she believes all the notes are real. She said most are not real. And she drew a specific line between the notes that are not real and the 2 notes that she believes are, the 2 notes that her family chose to respond to. That distinction is not casual. It is a precise statement from someone who has access to information the public does not have. She knows what made those 2 notes different from every other communication that arrived after her mother disappeared. She knows what specific details they contained that led her family to respond to them specifically. And in her interview with Hoda Kotb, which aired over 3 nights on March 26th and 27th, 2026, she said something else that sits just as quietly in the record. I hope not. I mean, we still don't know. Honestly, we don't know anything. We still don't know anything. 75 days, no arrest, no publicly named suspect, no confirmed location, no proof of life. A sheriff scheduled to testify under oath before the Pima County Board of Supervisors after that board unanimously invoked a territorial era law to compel his testimony about his conduct and his career. A blue Honda CR-V held for weeks at a mechanic shop under continued law enforcement custody, being put back together after an exhaustive forensic examination that the public has never been told the results of. DNA evidence from inside the home now sent to the FBI's National Lab for Advanced Analysis, including what investigative journalist Brian Enton reported is hair, a category of evidence that genetic genealogist C.C. Moore said recently could make this case solvable, describing new advancements in DNA extraction from rootless hair as potentially game-changing. And a ransom narrative that, when you strip it down to only what the documented record shows, raises more questions than it answers. Tonight we examine every documented inconsistency in the ransom framework. We examine what the physical evidence at the scene, the untouched medication, the undisturbed interior, the propped entry points, the camera blackout, actually describes about who executed this operation and how they knew what they knew. We examine the timeline gap that has never been independently verified. We examine what Savannah's own carefully chosen words reveal about what the family actually believes. And we examine what behavioral science says about the difference between silence and speech in a case like this. This is not about accusing anyone who has been officially cleared. The Pima County Sheriff's Department officially cleared all immediate family members and their spouses. That clearance is in the record and deserves to be stated. What this video examines is the documented evidentiary record and the questions that record produces. Questions that serious investigative analysis requires asking even when the answers are uncomfortable. Before we examine anything, if you believe cases like this deserve rigorous, evidence-based coverage that follows the physical record honestly and never substitutes certainty for documented fact, subscribe to Unclosed Files right now and hit the notification bell. New investigations every week. Hit the like button if you are following this case closely, and drop your most important question about the evidence in the comments below. I read everyone. Now, before any analysis, there is a woman at the center of this case who deserves to be remembered clearly. Nancy Guthrie had lived in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona for more than 50 years. Widowed in 1988 when her husband Charles died during a mining exploration trip in Mexico, she raised 3 children in that desert community alone. She attended St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Tucson, where her name has been spoken in prayer every Sunday since she disappeared. Sheriff Chris Nanos described her consistently and specifically as sharp as a tack, fully cognitively present, no impairment, a woman who understood everything happening around her. She had physical limitations that matter directly to what the evidence shows. She required daily medication for a serious heart condition. Medication the sheriff's department confirmed was left on the counter when she was taken. She had a pacemaker syncing to her phone via Bluetooth. She could not walk 50 yards unassisted, a fact confirmed publicly by the sheriff. She wore hearing aids, which she removed each night before sleeping, leaving her in complete silence, unable to hear footsteps, doors, voices, or movement anywhere in or around her home. She was taken on the night of January 31st into the early hours of February 1st, 2026. Let us begin with the timeline, because the timeline has a gap that has never been independently verified and that the entire subsequent framework rests upon. At 5:32 p.m. on January 31st, Nancy Guthrie left her home in an Uber, confirmed by the driver who spoke to investigators. The drive to her daughter Annie's home is documented. The evening at Annie and Tommaso Cioni's home, dinner, cards, family time, is attested to by multiple people who were present. That portion of the evening exists in the record with corroboration. The return home does not. Nancy did not take a rideshare back. Tommaso Cioni drove her, a detail confirmed publicly by the sheriff. According to the account provided, Cioni drove her the approximately 10-minute route from his and Annie's home to Nancy's residence. According to the account, he walked her inside. According to the account, he waited until the garage door closed before leaving. The garage door is documented as closing at 9:50 p.m. That sequence, the drive, the walking inside, the garage door closing, exists in the public record through a single source. There is no independent camera footage confirming the moment of arrival. There is no independent witness attesting to the sequence. There is no external data point, no rideshare record, no neighbor camera, no documented third-party verification, confirming that Nancy Guthrie was alive and secure inside her home at 9:50 p.m. Everything that follows in the investigative timeline, the 4.5-hour window between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m., the 41-minute operational window between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m., the entire framework of when the abduction could have occurred, rests on that single unverified endpoint. If the 9:50 p.m. timestamp is accurate, then a masked individual at the door at 1:47 a.m. is what it appears to be. If that timestamp is off in any direction, the framework shifts. This is not an accusation. Tommaso Cioni and the entire Guthrie family have been officially cleared by the Pima County Sheriff. This is an observation about the evidentiary structure of the timeline. There is a gap at its most critical point, and that gap matters because investigative integrity requires acknowledging it. Now let us look at what the scene itself shows, because the scene contains documented details that the Kidnap for Ransom framework does not fully explain. Law enforcement personnel who entered Nancy's home described the interior as immaculate. No overturned furniture, no broken objects, no signs of a struggle in the bedroom or the living areas. No disturbance suggesting a panicked confrontation inside the home. The evidence of violence, Nancy's blood, confirmed by DNA, appeared at the front threshold, at the point of exit, not in the interior spaces where she was presumably sleeping. Her medication was on the counter, left behind. In a kidnapping for ransom scenario where the stated goal is keeping someone alive long enough to collect payment, the most valuable item in that house was not the cash in her purse, which was also left untouched. It was the daily heart medication that an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker cannot survive without. Taking 30 seconds to grab that medication was not a logistical obstacle. It was a choice. Either the person who removed Nancy from that home did not care whether she would survive without it, or they did not anticipate a situation in which they would need to keep her alive. Multiple access points at the rear of the property were found propped open, using heavy patio containers that belonged to the property itself. These are not objects someone brought from outside. They are objects someone knew the location and weight of, objects placed with precision at specific entry points in darkness, without signs of hesitation or trial and error. The kitchen door, the sliding patio access, the side gate near the garage, propped deliberately, using property-specific objects, in a sequence that describes someone who either knew this property well enough to navigate it in darkness, or who had been told exactly what to use and where. Former FBI agent and CIA officer Tracy Walder analyzed the doorbell footage and identified what appears to be an antenna protruding from the suspect's jacket, assessed as either a walkie-talkie or a signal jammer. Every wireless camera on the property went dark that night, not just the doorbell camera that was physically handled, the others that required no physical contact, taken offline remotely, suggesting either a signal disruption device or remote access to the camera management system. A neighbor reported his own cameras went dark during the same window. If accurate, whatever disabled the cameras had enough range to affect more than one property. A localized electronic event, not just a single camera being covered by a hand. A signal disruption device of that kind is not equipment you buy impulsively. It is planned for, it is tested, and to deploy it effectively against a specific camera system, you need to know what system you are targeting, how it is configured, and what frequency or network it operates on. That knowledge comes from proximity to the system or from someone who has that proximity. Then there is the front door itself. NewsNation reported that the reinforced security gate at Nancy's front entrance is described as nearly impossible to breach from the outside under normal circumstances. The masked individual in the doorbell footage is on the porch. He is at the front entry. He is waiting. The door requires opening from within for a person on the outside to enter through it. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell publicly stated that she believes Nancy was carried out by more than one person based on the logistics, her mobility limitations, and the blood pattern at the threshold. A retired Pima County homicide detective assessed that 2 to 4 people may have been involved in the physical execution of this operation. If the door opened, and if it opened from within, one of two things is true. Either Nancy opened it herself, possibly because she recognized the person, possibly because someone said something that made her feel it was safe to open, or someone was already inside when the masked figure appeared on the porch. CNN's chief law enforcement analyst John Miller, analyzing this case publicly, said it directly. Whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. A crime that changed categories during execution. Something that began as one type of operation and became another when the plan encountered something it did not anticipate at the threshold. The blood at the front threshold is consistent with that assessment. An encounter at the door, not inside the home. A confrontation at the exit point. And an immaculate interior that describes not chaos, not struggle, not a panicked encounter, but a scene that was either controlled from start to finish or that was prepared to look controlled. Now let us examine the ransom notes and what Savannah's specific language about them actually tells us. Multiple ransom notes were sent to media outlets, TMZ, KVOA, KGUN, and to the family in the days after Nancy disappeared. FBI Special Agent in Charge Heath Janke addressed the notes at a February 5th press conference, stating that investigators were examining their legitimacy. He noted that one referenced an Apple Watch and one referenced a floodlight, information he described as publicly available. He also noted the notes did not include any contact information. Former FBI agents commenting publicly described the notes' delivery to media rather than directly to the family as highly unusual. In genuine kidnap-for-ransom operations, the captor establishes private communication with the family and maintains control of information flow. Public distribution to media outlets inverts that dynamic. Savannah's statement in her Hoda Kotb interview was precise. She said most of the notes are, in her understanding, not real. But the 2 notes her family received and responded to, she tends to believe those are real. That distinction requires explanation. What made those 2 notes different? What specific details did they contain that made a family with access to investigative briefings and law enforcement communication choose to respond to those 2 and not to others? The answer to that question has not been made public, but one documented report described notes containing details about specific object placements inside the home and conditions at the property that had not been publicly disclosed, details that would require either direct access to the scene or information from someone who had been inside. There is a scenario in which genuine notes from the person responsible for taking Nancy contain operational details that prove authenticity, details the writer knew because they were there. There is also a scenario in which notes sent from someone close to the situation contain those details for a different reason. The investigation has not publicly resolved which scenario applies. What CNN's Miller described, a crime that changed categories during execution, is consistent with a third scenario, that something happened at the threshold that was not part of the original plan, and that the ransom notes were introduced after that moment to redirect the investigative narrative. Notes sent to media, not to the family with contact information. Notes referencing a dead Bitcoin wallet that has never recorded a transaction. Notes with deadlines that passed in silence. Notes with no proof of life. Former FBI agent Johnny Grusing stated publicly that a genuine kidnap-for-ransom operation produces contact, escalation, and proof-of-life demands, because the captor's leverage depends on the family believing the victim is alive. The absence of all 3 is a specific pattern. It is not how ransom operations work when ransom is the genuine objective. Now let us examine something the investigation has surfaced indirectly through what has and has not been done. The blue Honda CR-V associated with Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni was impounded in the weeks following Nancy's disappearance. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed to Parade on March 11, 2026, that the vehicle remained in law enforcement custody at that point, at a mechanic shop, being put back together following an exhaustive forensic examination. Investigative reporter Dave Mack described the vehicle as being worked on by an auto mechanic under continued sheriff's custody. The vehicle was the last confirmed vehicle in which Nancy Guthrie traveled. She was in that car on the night she disappeared. An exhaustive forensic examination that results in the vehicle being put back together at a mechanic shop is not a routine evidence sweep. It is a comprehensive search for biological trace material, fibers, DNA, hair, anything that could connect the interior of that vehicle to what happened the night of January 31st. The fact that the vehicle required that level of examination, and that the results have never been made public, is a documented fact that sits in the investigative record without resolution. The Sheriff's Department officially cleared all immediate family members and their spouses. But the vehicle connected to the last confirmed person who drove Nancy was held for weeks under exhaustive examination. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither resolves the other. At 75 days, the gap between 9:50 p.m. and the discovery of Nancy missing the following day represents approximately 14 hours. 14 hours between the last confirmed contact and the moment alarm was raised, not by family who had been with her that evening, but by a friend who expected her at a virtual church service and noticed her absence. Savannah, from New York, had been calling hospitals after learning her mother was missing, but she was calling hospitals that Annie and Tommaso had already contacted. Savannah's calls from across the country were either a separate track run in parallel, the kind of thing a desperate family member does when they cannot do anything else, or they represent something quieter, a daughter who could not be fully confident that everything available had been done. That 14-hour gap, from 9:50 p.m. to roughly noon the following day when the friend's concern triggered the alarm, created a window in which everything could unfold. A neighbor woken by a call at 10:15 p.m. that went unanswered. A family member who drove the short distance to check when 2 calls went unreturned. Any one of those moments would have collapsed the timeline from 14 hours to minutes. The person or persons who executed this operation had 14 uninterrupted hours before the search began. That gap was structural, and it is a documented fact. None of this constitutes proof. The family has been officially cleared. Silence in a high-profile investigation of this magnitude is rational on the advice of counsel. The absence of a check-in call can be explained 100 different ways by 100 different families with 100 different routines. The Blue Honda's examination may have produced nothing of investigative value, but the evidence record, assembled honestly, keeps returning to the same observations. Entry points propped by property-specific objects in darkness, cameras disabled remotely on a specific network, a door that appears to have been opened from within, medication left behind in a scenario where keeping the victim alive was supposedly the objective. Ransom notes with no contact mechanism, no proof of life, no successful collection. Behavioral silence from the person most proximate to the endpoint of the verified timeline, while every other family member has spoken publicly. A vehicle held for an exhaustive forensic examination whose results remain undisclosed. Individually, each of these observations has an innocent explanation. Together as a pattern, they keep pointing toward the same question. Who knew this house well enough to navigate it in darkness without error? Who knew the camera system well enough to disable it remotely? Who knew the property-specific objects that could be used to prop specific doors? Who knew the operational details that ended up in the 2 notes Savannah believes are real? The investigation is still running. The DNA is in the FBI's National Laboratory. Hair evidence, if it produced a DNA profile, can now be processed through investigative genetic genealogy using methods that did not exist until recently. C.C. Moore, whose methodology contributed to identifying the Golden State Killer, said directly, "Hair absolutely can make this case solvable." The technology is advancing quickly. The sheriff who cleared the family is scheduled to testify under oath before the Pima County Board of Supervisors. Compelled by a territorial-era law the board invoked unanimously. His credibility, his record, and the decisions he made in the earliest hours of this investigation are all under formal scrutiny. Former U.S. Surgeon General and former Pima County Sheriff, Dr. Richard Carmona, stated publicly that the crime scene was corrupted and that you cannot reconstitute a crime scene once it has been compromised. The lead detective had never supervised a homicide before this case. The clearance of the family came from an institution that is now under formal oath scrutiny for its handling of this very investigation. That does not invalidate the clearance, but it does mean that the clearance must be understood in the context of the credibility of the institution that issued it. There is a woman missing. There is a documented evidence record that raises documented questions. There is an investigation that has produced no arrest in 75 days despite hundreds of agents and global attention. And there are people in Tucson who know what happened in that house on the night of January 31st. That is where this case stands. If you have information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, anything you saw or heard in the Catalina foothills area on or around the night of January 31st, anyone whose behavior changed dramatically in February, any detail about the people or vehicles in that neighborhood that you have not yet reported, the FBI needs to hear from you. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. The family reward is $1 million, payable anonymously. The FBI reward is $100,000. If this investigation reached you, if the documented evidence raised questions you had not fully assembled before, subscribe to Unclosed Files. Hit the notification bell. We follow every evidence thread in this case, and in every case that still demands answers. New documentary investigations every week. This documentary was produced for informational and educational purposes only, based entirely on publicly available sources, including reporting from Today, NBC News, Parade, Newsweek, TMZ, News Nation, and on-the-record statements from named credentialed professionals. The Pima County Sheriff's Department officially cleared all immediate family members of Nancy Guthrie and their spouses. No individual has been charged in connection with this case. All observations in this documentary about behavioral patterns, evidence characteristics, and investigative inconsistencies are based on documented public facts and expert commentary, not on accusations against cleared individuals. This channel has no affiliation with the Guthrie family, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, or the FBI. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her family deserves the truth, and the questions that the physical record keeps raising deserve to be followed wherever they lead. Let us also examine the behavioral dimension of this case with the precision it deserves, not as accusation, but as the analytical framework that professional investigators and behavioral scientists apply to cases of this type. Former FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jim Clemente has articulated the behavioral science of how innocent family members respond in active kidnapping investigations. His professional assessment, stated publicly in the context of this case, is that innocent family members in situations like this are frantic and visible. They make mistakes in their urgency to help. The urgency of innocence tends to produce observable public action. Statements to media, appeals to the abductor, cooperation that goes beyond what investigators formally request, visible grief that is documented and witnessed. Against that framework, the documented public record of the people most proximate to this case shows a specific pattern of differentiation. Savannah Guthrie spoke publicly multiple times on social media and on air, gave a 3-part interview to Hoda Kotb that aired in late March, directly addressed the abductor in an Instagram video, confirmed the family was prepared to pay. Cameron Guthrie spoke on camera. Annie Guthrie, publicly visible, her property was searched with her cooperation. Her vehicle was submitted for examination. Dominic Evans spoke to the New York Times for a published interview, cooperated with investigators for 40 minutes, stated his location on the night of January 31st. Uber driver cooperated with investigators and provided a statement. And then there is Tommaso Cioni, the last confirmed person to have been with Nancy Guthrie on the night she disappeared. The person who, by his own account, drove her home, walked her inside, and waited until the garage door closed. Officially cleared along with the rest of the immediate family. Not publicly named as a suspect by any law enforcement agency. In 75 days, Tommaso Cioni has not spoken publicly. That silence is not evidence of guilt. People have the absolute right to remain silent. In a high-profile investigation with active FBI involvement and national media attention, maintaining complete silence on the advice of counsel is a rational legal strategy, regardless of what a person knows or does not know. Every attorney in the country would provide that advice to a client in this position. But behavioral science is also specific about what the sustained exercise of that strategy signals in the context of the surrounding behavioral record. Someone who speaks publicly has calculated that speaking helps their position, that the benefit of visible cooperation exceeds the risk of disclosure. Someone who maintains complete silence across 75 days in which every other person in their immediate circle has spoken has calculated the inverse, that every word is a liability, that silence is preferable to any public statement under any circumstance. Both calculations can be made by an innocent person on sound legal advice, and both calculations can be made by someone with something to protect. The documented behavioral divergence does not tell investigators which applies. What it does is distinguish a specific behavioral response from the pattern exhibited by every other person in the immediate circle who had the opportunity to speak. The blue Honda CR-V adds a physical dimension to this behavioral analysis. The vehicle was held for an exhaustive forensic examination that required the car to be put back together at a mechanic shop, an examination thorough enough to require mechanical reassembly. That level of examination is not applied to vehicles when investigators believe there is nothing to find. It is applied when investigators believe the interior may contain biological trace material, DNA, hair, fibers, that connects the vehicle's interior environment to the night of January 31st. Nancy was in that car. What else was in it, or what traces of what happened that night remained in it, has never been publicly disclosed. The results of that examination have not been released. The vehicle was subsequently returned, and whether the examination produced findings that advanced the investigation, or produced nothing, or produced something that is now part of a confidential evidentiary record, none of that has been confirmed. Now let us examine what the Ransom framework looks like when you apply the professional standard that experienced investigators use. Follow the behavior, not the stated motive. The Ransom notes were sent to media outlets, TMZ, KVOA, K-Gun, not to the family's private channels, not through the kind of direct, confidential communication that genuine captors use to maintain leverage over families. Former FBI agents described this publicly as highly unusual. In a genuine kidnap for ransom operation, the captor's leverage depends on the family believing the victim is alive and on the captor controlling information. Public disclosure to media is the opposite of that dynamic. It broadcasts the claim without establishing any direct channel for negotiation. The Bitcoin wallet included in the demand has never recorded a transaction. TMZ confirmed they monitored the wallet and no payment was made. A genuine captor with a living hostage who is watching deadlines pass without payment escalates. They provide proof of life to demonstrate continued leverage. They make contact through new channels. They apply pressure in ways that are observable. The silence after both original deadlines passed, no escalation, no third note from the original sender, no new deadline, is a specific pattern that former FBI agents publicly described as inconsistent with how genuine kidnap for ransom operations function. Savannah's own statement, "I tend to believe those are real," was hedged in ways that deserve attention. She said she tends to believe, not that she is certain, not that investigators have confirmed it. She tends to believe, based on her access to information the public does not have, that the 2 notes her family responded to are real. That measured language from someone in direct communication with the FBI's investigative team is not the certainty that the public narrative around the ransom notes has often implied. And then the note containing what one report described as an apology, language suggesting the sender did not realize how fragile Nancy's condition was, that her death, if it occurred, was not intended. Real captors holding a victim for ransom do not apologize to the family. They apply pressure. They control the narrative. They do not soften it. Language that softens, that contextualizes, that shapes how the family understands what happened. That language serves a different purpose. It is not the language of leverage. It is the language of someone managing perception. Former FBI agent Johnny Grusing stated publicly and specifically, "The kidnap for ransom theory does not add up because the alleged kidnappers never reached out directly to the family, and there has been no proof of life." CNN's Miller, Whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. These are on-the-record assessments from named credentialed professionals who examined the same documented record and reached the same conclusion. The ransom framework, as it presents itself, does not behave the way genuine ransom operations behave. That does not resolve the case. It does not identify the person responsible. What it does is describe a specific evidentiary gap, a gap between what the ransom narrative claims and what the behavioral record of a genuine ransom operation produces, that investigators working this case have been examining since the deadlines passed in silence. At 75 days, with the case now entering a phase in which federal resources in Tucson are reportedly scaling back and tips have reduced in volume, the physical evidence that remains is bearing more weight than ever. The DNA in the FBI National Laboratory. The hair evidence that C.C. Moore described as potentially game-changing given new advances in rootless hair DNA extraction. The tattoo running through federal booking databases. The cell tower data that investigators are analyzing for devices that were dark on 3 specific January dates. The genealogy pipeline building a family tree from the mixed biological sample recovered inside the home. Each of these threads is independent, each is methodological, and each points toward a name that the investigation has not yet made public. The case is not cold. It is running on the evidence the scene left behind, the biological trace material that the person or persons responsible did not know they were depositing. 41 minutes of unmasked breathing inside a protected interior environment. Hair that may carry a complete DNA profile. A device whose IP address logged multiple searches from Tucson over 8 months. A tattoo on 1 inch of exposed wrist. A vehicle that required mechanical reassembly to examine fully. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 75 days. No arrest, no suspect, and a family that, by Savannah's own words, honestly does not know what happened. The answer is somewhere in that house. In the access points that were propped from within. In the camera system that was disabled remotely. In the door that required opening from within. In the medication that was left because keeping her alive was not the plan. That is what the physical record describes. And those questions deserve to be followed wherever they lead. There is a specific investigative concept that applies to this case and that experienced detectives use to structure the early phases of any serious crime investigation. The principle that proximity and knowledge together form the investigative core. Who was physically proximate to the victim in the hours before the crime? Who had knowledge of the property, its layout, its security systems, its routine, its vulnerabilities, sufficient to execute the operation without error and darkness? These 2 questions, applied to the documented record of this case, consistently produce a short list, not a list that constitutes accusation, a list that reflects the logical application of investigative principle to documented fact. Nancy Guthrie lived alone. She had a specific routine. She removed her hearing aids at night. She required daily medication. She had limited mobility. She had a specific camera system configuration. Her property had specific access points with specific locking mechanisms. Her home had heavy patio containers in specific locations that could be used to prop specific doors. The camera system operated on a specific wireless network that required specific knowledge to disrupt remotely. The person or persons who entered that property on the night of January 31st navigated it in darkness without error, without signs of confusion or trial and mistake, without triggering the kind of chaos that produces overturned furniture or interior disturbance. They knew the access points. They knew what objects were available to prop them. They knew the camera system and how to disable it. They knew the timing. The window between when Nancy's hearing aids came out and when the front camera was covered suggests operational knowledge of her specific routine. That level of knowledge does not come from a stranger who drove through the neighborhood. It comes from either direct familiarity with the property or from someone who provided detailed operational intelligence about the property to the person who executed the operation. Those 2 possibilities, direct familiarity or intelligence from someone with direct familiarity, are the same investigative territory. They point in the same direction, toward someone in Nancy Guthrie's immediate world who either acted or who provided information to someone who acted. The investigation has been running in that direction since the earliest days. The FBI searched Annie and Tommaso's home on February 4th, 5 days after Nancy disappeared. The vehicle associated with that household was examined exhaustively. The septic tank on the property was probed. All of these documented investigative actions are in the public record. not as accusations, but as the documented footprint of where the investigative attention has focused. The sheriff cleared the family. That clearance is in the record. But the investigative attention documented before the clearance, the search, the vehicle examination, the septic probe, reflects the operational logic of investigators following the principle of proximity and knowledge toward its logical starting points. At 75 days, the clearance has held publicly. The investigation has not produced an arrest from any direction, and the evidence threads still running, DNA, genealogy, cell tower data, tattoo databases, are methodological processes that operate on timelines that are measured not in days but in weeks and months. C.C. Moore has been clear. If the DNA can be processed through investigative genetic genealogy, it is just a matter of time. Time is not certainty, but it is not permanent stasis either. What we are watching is an investigation that has been running beneath the surface of public reporting for 75 days, accumulating evidence through methodologies that do not produce dramatic press conference announcements. They produce names, quietly, through the convergence of biological trace material and digital records and physical evidence that the person responsible did not know they were leaving. The immaculate house was not immaculate because nothing happened there. It was immaculate because whoever planned this understood that chaos leaves evidence, and control does not. That control is itself a form of evidence. It tells you something about who was in that house, about who knew it well enough to leave it looking untouched, about who understood that the absence of disorder would buy time. Time that has now run to 75 days, time that the investigation is using. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home, or if she cannot come home, her family deserves the truth, and the evidence record that points inward, toward familiarity, toward access, toward knowledge that strangers do not have, deserves to be followed with the same rigor as every other thread in this investigation. That is what serious investigative coverage requires, and that is what this case demands. One more documented thread requires direct examination before this investigation closes, because it sits in the public record without having received the sustained analytical attention it deserves. On February 11th, a message arrived claiming to be from someone not involved in Nancy's disappearance, but claiming to have information about who was. The sender asked for payment in Bitcoin, but the specific recipients the sender chose matter: Annie and Cameron Guthrie, not Savannah, who has the largest public platform and the most visible profile, but the two family members closest in physical proximity to where Nancy was taken. Former FBI agents and behavioral analysts commenting on this case have noted this targeting choice as analytically significant. If the objective is financial, extracting payment in exchange for information, you target the person most capable of mobilizing resources and most publicly visible. Savannah Guthrie is that person. She is co-anchor of one of the most watched morning programs in America. She is the most recognizable name in the family. If the February 11th sender's primary motivation was money, reaching out to Savannah through her public profile and public contact points would have been the logical approach. Instead, the message went to Annie and Cameron, the two siblings geographically and situationally closest to the location and the circumstances of what happened. That choice, if it reflects deliberate calculation rather than arbitrary selection, describes someone whose attention is oriented toward the location and the immediate circle, not toward the most visible financial target. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, commenting publicly on the pattern of communications in this case, noted that continued contact with the family, maintaining communication over weeks and months, serves specific purposes depending on the sender's relationship to the crime. An uninvolved person with genuine information who is not receiving payment typically either provides it or stops contacting. Sustained contact over weeks, across multiple channels from someone claiming to have information but never providing verifiable proof. That pattern describes something more specific than a disinterested witness. The overall communications pattern in this case, notes to media rather than to family, deadlines that pass in silence, no proof of life, targeting of proximity-based family members rather than financial target, sustained contact without resolution, is a specific behavioral signature. It is not the signature of a conventional ransom operation. It is the signature of communication that serves purposes other than ransom collection. What those purposes are: perception management, misdirection, psychological pressure on specific family members, maintaining the appearance of an outside actor, remains a question the investigation is working to answer. But the behavioral record of the communications, assembled honestly, does not support the narrative that they represent an external unknown actor who planned a financially motivated abduction and is waiting for payment. That conclusion does not come from speculation. It comes from the documented application of professional behavioral assessment standards by named, credentialed former law enforcement professionals to the documented record of this case. The investigation is 75 days old. The evidence is in federal laboratories. The genealogy tree is building. The behavioral record is documented. And the questions that the physical evidence keeps producing are still unanswered. Someone knows what happened in that house. The evidence suggests it is not a stranger. And the case is not closed.